The 7 Sages of the Bamboo Grove. Also known as the 7 Worthies of the Bamboo Grove, they are a group of scholars, writers, and musicians who, despite being grouped together, their interactions with one another are not entirely certain, meaning that they may or may not have necessarily known one another. The 7 sages are Chih-Chieh, Liu Ling, Ruan Ji, Ruan Xian, Xiang Ziyu, Wang Rong, and Shan Dao. As several of the sages lived during the Wei-Jin period, they were associated with the Xingtan school of thought. It was common for the political elites and the intellectuals of this time to practice the Xingtan philosophical movement. Literally meaning pure conversation, this movement evolved from Taoist scholars who were concerned with the fundamental natures of reality, existence, and its values. Particularly scholars belonging to the Neo-Taoist Xuanzui school of thought, which combined Taoist and Confucian beliefs through revision and discussion. Informal, pure conversation gatherings were hosted for discourse and debate. They acted as impartial continuations of the ongoing politically charged pure criticisms, the protests against the Han dynasty. These types of gatherings grew in popularity, which then led to them becoming enriched by the participation of Buddhist and Confucian scholars. Consequently, their scope broadened to include a greater variety of perspectives and topics, including Confucian ethics and Buddhist sutras. The invention of cheap paper in the 2nd century spread literacy to a much larger population. This brought a sense of chivalry to a large number of educated people, with notions of good, truth, justice, and virtue. These ideals forged heroes of the people of that time. Virtues urged many to relinquish politics as they preferred a quiet life in the countryside, or the life of a hermit, to the glamour and fame of court life. These so-called sublime men brought with them protests against any grossly unfair and morally wrong reign, often hidden by an appearance of unconcern. To them, the life of a court official was considered the life of dust and dirt, whilst the real dirt of a peasant's labour was viewed as a symbol of purity. When the openly Confucian Jin dynasty rose to power, the sages found their lives in danger. The Confucian certified honourable and joyful duty of serving one's country would mean taking office for the sages amid the dangerous changes of power within the government. Among other things, some of them wrote Taoist-influenced literature, such as poems that criticised the court administration. Not all of the sages shared the same views, however. Some joined the Jin dynasty. Some even tried to negotiate their way through or out of political positions by adopting the roles of alcohol-fueled pranksters. As it's traditionally written, the sages wished to escape the intrigues, corruption, and stifling atmosphere of the political court life. They gathered in a bamboo grove near Chih-Chieh's residence in Shanyang Commandery. They praised each other's work and enjoyed the simple rustic lifestyle, contrasted by the life of an official. They stressed the enjoyment of alcoholic beverages and cold food powder, personal freedom, spontaneity, and a celebration of nature. The group's lifestyle became a common theme for art, as they inspired others who also sought to retreat during times of political upheaval. Chih-Chieh is sometimes called Zichang and has a courtesy named Shu Yi, a combination of Shu, which means the 3rd son of the family, and Yi, which means knight. Born in the year 223, he became a writer, poet, philosopher, musician, and alchemist, and he devoted himself to art and refinement. In his time, he was a noted author, famous composer, and guqin player. He has been described as handsome and tall, recorded at just over 6 foot. Chih-Chieh married Tao Tao's granddaughter, although some say it was his great-granddaughter. He was also especially close to Ruan Ji. Their relationship is described as stronger than metal and as fragrant as orchids. Shan Dao's wife once spied on the two men during sexual intercourse, where it said she became impressed by their prowess. Shan Dao was born in the year 205. He became an official under Tao Wei and went on to serve the Jin dynasty until he died at the age of 78 in the year 283. Chih-Chieh was highly critical of Confucianism and challenged many social conventions of the time which provoked scandal and suspicion. He wrote scripture on living a longer life, music theory, politics, and ethics. Among his works is an essay on nourishing life, a discourse on songs which lack sorrow or joy, called On the Absence of Sentiments in Music, a composition on the guqin, and a discourse on individuality. One of his musical pieces, Xuanling San, recounts the assassination of a king of Han. It was said to have been inspired by a spirit visitation and became widely acclaimed. He undertook an appointment under the Tao Wei state, but official work bored him. When Sima Zhao rose to power, he sent Zhong Hui as an envoy offering a civil position to the sage. Ji Kang rejected the offer, but he was also rude and disrespectful towards Zhong, who would get his revenge. When Ji Kang's friends were imprisoned with false charges, he testified in their defense, but was also thrown in jail. Zhong Hui urged Sima Zhao to have him executed, and even though 3,000 scholars petitioned for Ji Kang's pardon, his enemies were implacable. In 262, at the age of 39, just before his execution, Ji Kang said to have played one last melody, a swan song forever lost. Ruan Ji was born in the year 210. His father was Ruan Yu, one of the 7 scholars of Jianan poetry, who were promoted by the Tao clan. The Ruan family was loyal to them, as their fortune rose with the rest of the Tao family. However, their lacking military prowess and political power fell short when it came to backing their moral convictions and willingness to speak out against the rising Sima clan. The Book of Jin describes him as uncommon, stubborn and self-willed, tempered, proud and independent. Following only the gusts of soul, sometimes he would wander away on the hills and forget to return, and at length come back crying bitterly. At other times he would shut himself up with his books and see no one for months. He read a lot, especially liking Dao Di Ching and Zhuang Ji, the 2 fundamentals of Taoism. He drank a lot. He possessed the skill of transcendental whistling, which was believed to enable one to summon animals and talk to the dead. He loved to play the guxian, and was once so inspired by an idea that he forgot everything in the world, and many considered him to be a madman. It's fair to say that Ruan Ji was born into peril, from the ongoing military struggles against Shu, together with impending military and political changes. He witnessed bloody wars, struggles for power in the court, and the Sima family's rise. The safety of Ruan Ji seems to be underwritten by his willingness to be labelled as a drunk eccentric. Despite the dim times, this was a period of great achievements within spiritual culture. The Pure Talk's open discussions paved way for eccentric forums, interests in metaphysics, the great popularity in Taoism, and the spread of foreign learning such as Buddhism. Poetically, he embraced what the times offered him, and he was able to avoid many political dangers, turmoils and snares of his time. He was part of the Jianan style, but also contributed to the poetry developments at the beginning of the 6 dynasties. Ruan Ji put all his spirit and all his life into his poems. His poems confront illusions of life and the intensity of everyday matters, glory of a hero and solitude of a hermit, love's passion and the inevitability of separation. All the lyrical poetry of Ruan Ji is penetrated by a thought of sorrow, which he accepted as an eternal and unavoidable friend, near him throughout life. He once wrote, "Only with sorrow thoughts occurring, without sorrow there is no thoughtful mood." His friends and fellow poets induced ecstatic experiences through music, wine and drugs, especially the notorious cold food powder, which created psychedelic states and made the body feel very hot, causing people to take their clothes off and jump into pools. When back in their ordinary selves, they would write poetry of freedom and escape, applied the concept of free and easy wandering, the sense of getting away from it all. They continued in this way for their desperate search for a better world within. Together, they create the image of wise men enjoying life uninhibitedly, realizing the old dream of a Taoist concord of free men who are gifted with hidden wisdom. They contemplated many wonders pertaining Taoism, and then united under them more than any other principles. In his works, Ruan Ji talks about remote things, but remains silent about the bamboo grove. He notes that the other sages were the main focus of his search for free and frank friendship. Chen Shu's mention of Ruan Ji was more than modest, highly talented, having the ability to avoid the chains of court morality and traditions, but unbalanced and undisciplined, he was eager to banish his temptations. Another describes him as a connoisseur of ancient essays, diligently engaged in sciences, and someone who read books until nightfall. This quiet solitude and obsession in perceiving the knowledge of the ancients was his hidden source of inspiration. He was open to honour the court, but never hid his despise of the careerist attitudes he encountered. Initially he tried to improve the world, but living during the Wei-Jin transition, he rarely met others who preserved their morals to his standard. Because of that, he abandoned his affairs and was intoxicated all the time. He spoke out on an issue at court one day regarding a boy who had killed his mother. He laughed as he said, "He has gone so far to kill his mother, he could allow himself to kill his father too." All who heard this lost their gift of talking, then demanded that he explains himself. The killing of the father is the worst crime in the empire, How could you say that is possible? Ruan answered that animals and birds know their mother, but are unaware of their father. Killing father is becoming like animals and birds, but those who killed their own mother are even worse than animals. Nobody objected to his words. When he received news of his mother's passing during a game of chess, his partner asked him to finish it, but without showing any emotion, he played on until the end. When it was finished, he drank 2 measures of wine and started to groan. At the funeral, he wept so violently that he brought up several pints of blood. He didn't mourn, ate meat, and drank wine, despite knowing all of this was against the norm. When people arrived to support him, he only looked at a favoured few with more than just the whites of his eyes. When Ji-Kang arrived with wine and musical instruments, he welcomed him with his pupils and met him with happiness. Traditionally, there are 3 options regarding Ruan Ji's character. The first is negative and sees him as an inspirer of vicious dissoluteness. The second considers him a wielder of disturbance. And the third option sees him as a wise man who stood up above all of mankind. The poet Ruan Ji praised him as the first man after legendary rulers of ancient times who found the way to paradise of universal careless intoxication. Ruan Ji passed away from old age in the year 263 at age 53. When he saw that his time was coming, he said, "Only one moment, but how much sorrow is hidden." Liu Ling was born in 211 in the state of Pei. He is described as short and unattractive, with a dissipated appearance, meaning someone who has overindulged in life's pleasures. Popularly regarded as an eccentric, he was notorious for his love of alcohol. The early depiction of him stood atop tombs drinking wine from a gourd, and his most famous work, In Praise of the Virtue of Wine, no doubt influenced this image. A folk tale tells about Liu Ling being followed at all times by a servant bearing a bottle of wine and a shovel. He was equally prepared to offer him wine or bury him if he fell over dead at any given moment. Another tale cites his practice of walking around his home in the nude and explaining to surprised guests, "I see the earth and skies as my home, and this room as my pants. What are you gentlemen doing in my pants?" Ruan Xian was born at an unknown date. He was especially skilled with the lute, so skilled that an old version of this instrument was named after him during the Tang dynasty. The Book of Jin describes his achievements in music as reaching a divine understanding. He had a Xian-based slave who went on to give birth to one of his 2 sons, Ruan Fu. Fu had an uncommon obsession with wooden clogs, and he would exhaust himself when he waxed his many pairs. Xiang Ziyu's most famous contribution is a commentary on the Xuanling. His friend was charged with treason and killed by the ruling Jin dynasty. He carefully and cleverly reworded his previous antagonistic words to Sima Zhao, which enabled him to avoid any prosecution. The final sage, Wang Rong, was born in 234 in Shandong Commandery. His grandfather, Wang Xiong, was Wei's regional inspector of Yu province. He served under Jin as a military general during the conquest of Wu in the year 280. During the campaign, he led his troops to Wuchang, then merged with Wang Jun's forces, and together they advanced towards Jianyi. He passed away at the age of 71 in 305, after having an illustrious career within Jin, where he reached one of the top ranks, minister over the masses. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.